I thought I would go through some of the questions from your test review that most of you have started today and you're going to continue on with tomorrow. So I'm not going to go through every single question. What I've done is kind of pick the questions that I find majority of students sometimes get stuck on or aren't quite sure about. So we're going to start with number 5. The question says, what percent does each diagram represent? And a reminder, one completely shaded grid represents 100%. So these are using those hundreds grids to represent percentages. So that goes back to our section on 4.1. So for question A, you'll notice there's not really any shading inside this hundreds grid, except this little itty bitty part here. So what they do is they kind of imagine enlarging just this square of the grid, and they're showing you sort of a more detailed picture here. Okay, and what I identified is this is actually showing tenths, because if I look, right, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sections. So that's why I know that's showing tenths. So then what I'll do is I'm going to count the sections that are colored. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So what this is actually showing us would be 7 tenths as a percentage. You can leave that as a fraction, or you could also write it as 0.7%. That as a fraction, or you could write that as a percent. Percent tends to be the typical format that you would see when you're using 100 grids. Question B. So again, this time you'll notice there's not a lot of shading going on here. There's this little itty bitty square down here, okay, and they've kind of like zoomed in on it. And now this is showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fifths. So I'm going to count. I have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5. So that little zoomed in square is showing 3/5%. But again, if you wanted it as a decimal, all I'm doing is going 3 divided by 5, and I could say that's the same as 0.6%. Something to note too, notice this one had the little zoomed in square up top in the right hand corner. This one was in the left hand corner. Technically, it could be anywhere on the grid. Okay, question C. So this time we do have some shading on the actual 100 grid itself, beyond just the zoomed in part. So I'm going to count. So I know that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 across, right? So that's 10 across this way, 10 down, which is why it's called the 100 grids. So it's 10 across, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down that are completely shaded in. So if this is 10 across, and if that's 5 down, I know that in total, there's 50% shaded there. So I know I have 50 for sure, but then I have this little zoomed in piece here. This time different, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. So it's actually showing quarters. And if I look, only one of those quarters is shaded. So we could say it's 50.25%, or as a decimal, we could say that's 50.25%. All right, question D. This time there's actually multiple hundreds grids. So this first one that's fully shaded in is representing 100%. So it means 100% of these squares are completely filled in. Then I have another one, so I'd go plus, I have another 100%, and then I have a third grid, and if I look this time, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is 10 by 1, 2, 3, 4 fully colored. Okay, so that would be 40. But then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra ones colored in. So that's indicating 45%. When you add those all up together, so 100 plus 100 would be 200. Add the 45, that's actually representing 245%. Moving on to question number 6, there's quite a few questions tied to this. So it tells you use 100 grids to represent each percent. So I'm going to highlight 3 of them. I'm going to look at question B, question C, and then I believe question D. Yep, question D. All right, so this is actually opposite of the last question. So it's telling me the percent, and I want to show it in a pictorial way using the 100 grids. So question B is 1/10 of a percent. So sometimes, depending if you need to, if not, that's fine. You might want to remind yourself, okay, that would be like 0.1%. In terms of shading though, so I know I can't shade a complete square, right? That would be incorrect. That would be 1%, so that's no good. So I'm going to imagine that I've had one of them kind of zoomed in. So I don't know, maybe I'll just pick this one. So I could say, well, imagine I have this square. I'm zooming in, and then I'm noticing that it's cut up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is showing tenths. Well, if you look at what I'm trying to represent, I want 1/10. So then I would just show that I would have one shaded square here. And then it's kind of hard, but on your actual picture, try the best that you can, but you can show that there's like a teeny tiny bit here shaded. If it looks like it's too much, that's okay. If it's too little, that's fine. What I'll be looking at is more so your enlarged or like zoomed in picture here. Okay, question C. So this time I want 7 and 7/8. So 7 means that I know I can color in 7 of the squares right away. Now, here's the thing, doesn't matter. I could color 7 this way, I could color 7 that way. I guess you could start down here if you wanted. That kind of seems a bit odd to me, but to each their own. So I will just go horizontally. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll color it in nicely. Okay, double check. Yep, that's 7. So I've covered this part, but again, I have that little piece, so 7/8. So I'm going to imagine, well, this next square, I'm going to zoom in. This would kind of be the picture that I would see. It's already showing eighths, right? So there's 8 squares here. And then because it tells me it's 7/8, I need to then color 7 of these. So here would be 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then again, you do want to go back to your original one that you kind of circled and just kind of indicate that there is some shading here. So this is pretty close to being a hole. So this one's going to have more shading than the last one. So I don't know, maybe I shade it like that. My bad. Okay, question D is asking you to represent 172.5%. So you'll notice I've kind of already done some shading here for us. So this first one is representing, this is the 100%. So all 100 of the squares are colored in. And then this time, so I know this is 10, right? So this is showing 10. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns that are also filled in. Okay, so 10 times 7, that's giving me the 70. Well, and then you'll notice that I had to color an extra 2. So this right here is representing 72%. Okay, but I'm still missing this little 0.5%. Okay, so again, I'm going to pick a square. I'm going to pretend that I were to zoom in. Okay, and then remember, if you had 0.5 as a percent, well, this is in the 10th position. So that's like you saying you have 5/10 of a percent. So that may make it a bit easier to realize that, well, if I have tenths here, I have to shade 5 of them. So I'm going to shade the top 5. It doesn't matter. You could shade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. Okay, and then go back to your square. Now, clearly this is half, so you should be able to eyeball that you're going to shade about half of it. So that's how I'd represent 172.5%. So question number 9 asks you to copy and complete the following table, and they tell you the first row is done for you. So basically, you're going to be given a number, might be a fraction, might be a decimal, might be a percent, and they want you to write it in the different formats. Okay, so the example they give you is 1 2/5. They write it as a decimal, and they say it's 1.4. As a percent, they're saying that's 140%. So as we go through this chart, I'm just going to remind you that in the lesson, so this was section 4.2, in the notes, I talked about this little diagram that might be helpful. If you have a different way to answer the questions, go right ahead. Okay, so I always tell you to kind of work with what makes sense to you. But yeah, so I'm going to reference this as I go through number 9. Okay, so question A, they give you the decimal format. So this one's kind of nice to start off with. If I want to go from decimal to percent, okay, using my little chart, I could just times this by 100. So as a percent, 0.115 would actually be the same thing as 11.5%. All right. Then we talked about, so I'm going to go do some work on the side here. Okay, so now we're going to look at how you find the fraction version. So in the notes and in the video that the notes followed, the method that was mentioned was always taking the percent form and writing it over 100. So we could start by going, we have 11.5%. You drop the symbol when you change it to a fraction though. So that's 11.5 out of 100. Okay, so that's actually what this is representing. Now, this can't be your final answer. It looks really weird to have a decimal as part of your fraction. So then what we talked about is you could times this by 10 times this by 10. You got to keep it balanced, right? Whatever I do to the top, I have to balance out on the bottom, so my denominator. And then I could write this now as 115 over 1,000. All right, now this is good. There's no decimal. So we can now focus on trying to reduce this or simplify it down. Okay, so lowest terms. Well, I have a 5 and a 0, so I'm going to check. I can actually divide the top and the bottom by 5. And I can write this in lowest terms as 23 over 200. So that's the fraction that I'm going to fill into my chart. Here's the other option though. Some of you might realize that from the decimal format, okay, you might understand and feel comfortable with the fact that this is your tenths digit, okay, that's your hundredths, that's your thousandths. So if you understand that this 0.115 is representing 115 thousandths, you are more than welcome to go straight here. Okay, so you don't have to use this method if you're comfortable realizing this is to the thousandths place. So I know that I can write that as the 115 over 1,000. Okay, so as I always tell you guys, make sure just stick with whatever makes more sense to you. All right, so either way, if you were to work it out like this and then simplify it, or go straight here and simplify, you'll still get 23 over 200 for our fraction. Okay, question B. So this time they give you the percent. So we have 23 3/4%. We want to change that to a decimal. Now, what I might find easier is I'm going to think of this as 23.75%. So I might change that fraction into a decimal right away. Now, we practice that if I want to go from percent to decimal, well, if to go one way you multiply by 100, to go the other way, you must have to divide. So I'm going to take this, divide that by 100. Okay, so 23.75 divided by 100. This as a decimal would be 0.2375. All right. And then again, this tends to be the hardest part in terms of switching the formats, is getting it into the fraction. So if I have the decimal form, 0.2375, okay, the notes in the video said, well, you're going to write this from the percent over 100. This looks funny. So this time though, because I have tenths, hundredths, I would actually want to multiply the top by 100 and the bottom by 100. Okay, so then I'm going to get 2,375 over 100 times 100 will actually give you 10,000. Okay, and then if I reduce this down, so 2375. So we can reduce that down. You can divide the top and the bottom by 125. I figured that out by dividing by 5, dividing by 5, dividing by 5. And this will reduce down to 19/80ths. So that would be our fraction format. wrong number on top, 19/80ths. All right, again, an option. If you have the decimal and you understand this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, feel free to go straight from the decimal format and write it over 10,000. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so two different ways to get to the fraction in the box. Again, do whatever makes sense for you. Okay, question C. So this one's a little bit easier. We have the fraction. If we want to get the decimal, you literally just take the 3 divided by the 200. So to go this way, I will just go 3 divided by 200. So that's going to give me 0.015. And then if I keep going, go from the decimal to the percent, well, now I can times this by 100, and that would be like 1.5%. So question C to me was a lot easier than question A and question B. Last question for 9. Question D, they give you the decimal is 3.85. So let's go to the percent first. To times that by 100. That's going to be the same as 385%. Okay, well, now I want to go from probably the percent back to the fraction. So I'll follow the method from the notes, the video. Tells me to take the percent, write it over 100. This time it's a lot nicer. I don't have decimals, so I can just start to look at simplifying it. So again, I'll start to divide it by 5 because I have a 5 and a 0 as my last digits. Doesn't take long. If you divide top by 5, you should get 77. And then the bottom, you would get 20. So this is like 77/20. And then one piece to add here with question 9D, because that is written as an improper fraction, right? So the bigger number is on top, smaller is on the bottom. You could also write it as a mixed number. So we could say that 20 goes into 77 3 times, and then we would be left with 17/20. And I think that's the form they actually have in their solution for the textbook. Next question I'll look at is number 12. So it tells you to determine the following, write your answer to the nearest tenth. As a reminder, that means it wants one decimal place. So there's a whole bunch of questions here. I'm not going to cover every single one using the two different options. I'll maybe show you one or two and then just write down the answers. So question A says, we are supposed to find 115% of 230. All right, now in the notes when I introduced this topic to you, one strategy was to use estimation. Now I want to clarify, being able to estimate these using somewhat mental math, it is a good strategy. If you are struggling with it, please do not get frustrated. This is a strategy that we will come back to when we return to our regular classes in the fall with grade 9. Okay, so right now, what I want you to focus on, and that's the really, really important takeaway, is can you calculate this using a calculator? Okay, so if the estimation did not go well, that's okay. Kind of just put it on the shelf for a bit. And I just want to make sure that you know how to use a calculator to find a percentage. All right, so question A, we want 115% of 230. So two different ways you can do this. All right, they're both with a calculator. So for A, you could change to a decimal first. So I could take 115%, okay, divide it by 100. So that's going to give me 1.15. And then now I take the decimal and multiply it by the number that I'm trying to find the percentage of. So this question, it was 115% of 230. So I would take the 1.15 and times it by 230. Okay, so this would be 264.5. And it did want one decimal place. So that would be my final answer for A. Now, you want to think about this. So it wanted you to find, I'll go back here, it wanted 115% of some number. Okay, well, if this is over 100%, you need to understand that the answer you're getting has to be higher than the number you started with. okay, because you have more, right? 100% would be 230. You're then adding an extra 15%. So it makes sense that our answer, right, the 264.5 looks somewhat reasonable. If I were to get an answer of, let's say, like 126, I would want to check, okay, well, if this is supposed to be actually bigger, because it's more than 100%, something must have gone wrong. Okay, so option one, you can change to a decimal first, but again, I'm using my calculator. Okay, so take the percentage, divide it by 100, there's my decimal, take that decimal, times it by the number you're trying to find the percentage of. Okay, so that's option one. Option two is actually your calculator should have a percent button. And I apologize, my percent symbols sometimes look a little bit wonky. But on your calculator, somewhere you should have this as a standalone button, or it might be like a second function or a shift, or it might be like color coded. So I do want everyone at some point to please try and find it, because going forward, right, so continuing even with this unit that we were just wrapping up, and then into grade 9, we're sort of more going to focus on using the button to do the calculation and then moving on to the next step. Okay, so make sure you know where this is on your calculator. So if I can find that, what you're allowed to do is actually you can just go, so I could go 115, and then I could hit my percent button. Then I would go times, so I'm kind of showing you like the buttons I'd push on my calculator. So I would times it by the 230, and you'll notice you should still get the exact same answer. All right, tiny hiccup. So it depends on your calculator. There's tons of different calculators out there, and sometimes they work in a slightly different way. So if this doesn't work, like if you push 115 and then you hit the percent button and nothing comes up on your screen, you might then have to actually enter it this way. So you might have to put the 230 first and then times, and then you would enter the percent. Okay, so it just depends on the calculator that you have. So again, if you're not sure, first of all, where to find this button, or like you tried this way, it didn't work, you tried that way, it doesn't work, please let me know. Take a picture of your calculator, send it my way, and then I will help you work through that. All right, so this question then, we would say the answer is 264.5. Okay, so all the rest of these now, I'm not going to do option one, option two. Like I said, I want you guys to actually be pretty comfortable with the button on your calculator. So for question B, I would just go 80 decimal. So I'm going to change this to 0.75 in my calculator instead of 3/4. So I'm going 80.75%, and then times 50. And I would find that is 40 decimal. Watch your rounding. So your calculator tells you this, depending on how much you're showing. We want to the nearest tenth though. So actually this final answer, we would say it's 40 decimal 4 for question B. Okay, now the rest of these are basically the same type of question, just different numbers, fraction format, decimal format. Okay, so make sure you do try these using your percent button on your calculator. Check your solutions against the ones I posted through my website. And if it's not working or your answers are a bit off, please let me know. Okay, so getting into more so the word problems. Photocopier increased a diagram to 250% of its original size. What is the enlarged length of the diagram if its original length was 2.5 centimeters? Now, obviously it's somewhat of a word problem, right? They tend to sometimes get a bit wordy. So I would go back, I'm going to highlight my numbers. So I have 250% and then that 2.5 centimeters. Okay, well, what this is really asking you to find, so I'm going to shift over here. It's really saying, what is 250% of 2.5? All right, so again, your two options above, right? You could change to decimal first or just use your percent button. So maybe as review, I'll show you both ways again. Okay, so I'll put option one. If I change to a decimal first, I would go 250 divided by 100. which is 2.5. Then I take that value, so the 2.5, and I times it by whatever I'm trying to find the percentage of. So I'm timesing that by 2.5. So you're really actually finding 2.5 squared. And this will come out to 6.25, and that would be centimeters. And I don't think it said to round it. Yep. Okay, so that would be option 1. Option 2, if you could find your calculator, the percent button, you could simply just go 250, hit the percent button, then you're going to go multiply that by 2.5, and you should find you get the exact same answer. Again, just be careful. You might instead have to put 2.5 first and then times it by the percentage. All right, and then it technically is a word problem, so good habit. I do want you guys to have concluding statements or just like a final sentence. So you could say the enlarged length enlarged length would be 6.25 centimeters. Really important. Please make sure you remember your units there. Number 16 tells you that the cost of an airline ticket is $289.50. And added to this cost, there are the following. So there's a 5% GST, 7% PST, 1% airport improvement fee, and 3/4% booking fee. So the question wants you to figure out what is the total cost of the ticket. So this ties back to our last section, actually, section 4.4 on combining percents. So this is a situation where all of these taxes and fees are actually going to be applied at the same time. So if that's happening, you're allowed to actually combine them first. All right, so we're going to take the 5%, which is the GST. And I think it's good to point out what GST is. A lot of people think that's government sales tax, but it's actually referred to as the goods and services tax. Then you have your PST. Okay, that's your provincial sales tax. And then they talked about an airport fee. So I'll just put like air, and then a booking fee. I'll just put book here. Okay, I think it's important to label what the percentages represent. So if you add those all up together, you will get 13.75%. And then you'll notice that I also wrote it as a decimal form, so 13.75%. Reason why I did this is this will be a bit easier to use when I'm entering it into my calculator. Okay, but you could have left it in this form as well. So total taxes, I am basically going to now find what is 13.75% of that ticket price, so the $289.50. So I'm going to calculate $289.50 times 13.75%. At this point, it's up to you. If you wanted to change this to a decimal first and then multiply it, go ahead. But again, try your best to use your percent button, especially when you have questions like this, right? So when you calculate that, you got to be careful. We are talking about dollars and cents. So this will be $39, and it'll actually round to 81 cents. Okay, so we figured out total taxes. Now the total cost then is going to be your airline ticket. So the $289.50 plus the total taxes that we just calculated, right? We just figured out it's $39.81. So we'll add that together. So $289.50 plus $39.81 should give us a total of $329.31. Okay, and then you'll notice I already kind of started my sentence at the end here. So we would say the total cost of the ticket is $329.31. So that would be our final answer. And you had some practice as part of the section textbook practice questions. So what it tells you, basically you have these two places, Cedarvale and Pinedale. They both start with the same population. So they both start with 1,200 people. And then over the next 2 years, two things happen. So in Cedarville, there's an increase by 8% one year, 7% the next year. So I'm just going to highlight Cedarville increases by 8%, 7%, and they started with 1,200 people. But then you also have Pinedale. So Pinedale starts with 1,200, so same starting population, but then over the 2 years, they just increased by 15%. So just in total, after 2 years, their population has increased by that amount. So there's a couple questions we're going to answer, but what I would probably do, this is one of those questions that you probably want to set it up sort of in like a step format. So I already kind of have it set up here. So I'll start with Cedarville. What color did I use? Blue. Okay, so I'm finding this value, this value. All right, so I don't know the date, they just say some year, there's 1,200 people. All right, now year one, so I'll put here after 1 year, they tell you that it grows by 8%. So I now have to find what is 8% of that population. So what is 8% of 1,200? All right, so a couple options, change that to a decimal, just use your calculator, it's up to you. But I will have 8% times 1,200. Okay, this is actually going to be equal to 96. So after year one, there were 1,200 people. Now it's grown by 96. So that new total for the population in Cedarville is 1,296 people. I'll just put PPL for people. All right, well then another year happens and there's another growth. So then this time after 2 years, okay, the population was 1,296. It grew by 7%. So now we're trying to find what is 7% of this new population. So what's 7% of 1,296? Okay, again, options, change to a decimal, times it by the 1,296. Use your calculator with the percent button. So 7% times 1,296. Okay, this is going to be an extra 90.72 people.